Prevention. Okay, the third assumption is that agroecologically orchestrated systems can match or even outperform the relevant natural systems they replace. Now, this is the controversial assumption, and I worded it so intentionally because I believe that if we really wrestle with this concept, then we can start to shift our perspective on nature-based solutions and natural farming in general. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the system that I encountered here on my farm 20 years ago was kind of a bush mixed with grassland, some trees. Um, it was progressing into a forest, but quite slowly. And the claim that I'm making is that by the interventions that we have done, that progression of the soil to even support a mature forest has been sped up. So if we allow ourselves to think that by us inputting our creative energies and our vision to a system, that we can actually outperform what nature would do on that site at the stage where we encountered this. Now, that's not to say that we could outperform a rainforest, a climax rainforest, in terms of diversity and the rate that soil organic matter would increase. But very few of us have encountered a climax rainforest, and the situations that we have been dealing with or are dealing with are compromised ecosystems that need healing and repair, even though they might have been beautiful in terms of their full potential. I would hazard a guess that next to none of us encountered an ecosystem like this. So we will circle back to this assumption, but we're going to move forward. Okay. So we need to talk about solutions to increase soil organic matter. Natural systems, of course, increase soil organic matter through plant root systems in symbiotic relationship with the soil microbiome. So this is a critical realization. I mean, I always, through my studies of soil science, there was mention of this, but there was never a focus on this. And I think we can all be very encouraged to know that soil science is changing. And we have finally reached the point where we as scientists and researchers are realizing we don't know very much about the soil. And that this is really the starting point of the amazing research that is coming, that will come, and that from this humble position, there's a magnificent journey ahead of us. So one of the assumptions I made when I began organic farming 20-something years ago here was that if I add a bunch of material on the surface of the soil, I incorporate compost. I tried trench composting where I dug deep ditches and gathered up everything that I could and packed it into trenches and covered it up and planted on it and figured that I would transform the soil in a year or two. But none of it seemed to really work. And not to say that compost didn't allow me to grow plants without chemicals, but I had to come to a realization several years ago that if I'm adding so much compost every year and then turning the soil, which I know volatilizes the organic matter and it's released as carbon dioxide, am I really doing everything that I thought I was doing? And is there a better way? Well, we have learned now conclusively that there is a better way, and it is following nature. It's a nature-based solution. So nature, of course, doesn't cultivate the soil, and nature generally doesn't do hot composting. But what nature does is use the root systems of plants to build soil organic matter. So the underlying theme of this entire presentation is this, and if everyone takes away one thing, it is to continually think about and reaffirm that our focus needs to be on plants, root systems, building soil organic matter for us. And so the strategic moves we make and how we design our systems has to be based around diverse, robust root systems as occupying as much of the soil as possible. Okay, there's other related things, but this is the key central concept. Okay, so how do we increase soil organic matter naturally? Like I just said, more roots in the ground, reduce soil disturbance. Like I mentioned, by oxygenating our soil, we do very good things by causing the microbiome or stimulating the microbiome to break down and cycle through nutrients that are then provided to our plants. This, of course, is great, but the result of this is the loss of organic matter. And so we cannot just do it haphazardly. We have to do it strategically. We have to create areas of soil organic matter accumulation and microbiological sanctuaries. We need to also rethink weed management strategies. Sometimes we need to intervene and improve the soil microbiome. And perhaps most importantly, related to the root systems being the driver of soil organic matter, we have to grow healthier plants. Okay, and we'll dive into each of these in a little more depth. Okay, I pulled up this interesting background picture here. Let me just see if I can point to it. I think this is an AI generated image when I put up complex diverse root systems. This is what came up. And I think these are melons or squash that they have representing root systems. I had to include it because it speaks to the central concept that what we see above ground of a plant is not necessarily what's going on below ground. And we need to start selecting species in and around our farms that focus on their root systems and providing root exudates to the soil microbiome or the soil rhizosphere, also known as a rhizobiome, when we are considering our soil interventions. Briefly, I've alluded to exudates. And if we are not familiar that plants budget up to 60%, some plants, like some tubers, into secreting sugars. That's why beets and carrots are sweet, exuding sugars into the soil profile to attract and nurture the beneficial soil microbiome that then present all types of nutrients, micronutrients, water, everything back to the plant that the plant requires. So it is a system, a complicated system. As I mentioned, we're just starting to understand it, but this is going to be the focus, I believe, not only my research, but a lot of research going forward is how we can manipulate, increase, and encourage these systems. Now, what I know for sure is that bio-intensive planting is the best way that we as planters, farm managers, agronomists, agricultural practitioners can encourage ourselves and other farmers to increase soil organic matter. So simply by reducing plant spacing, intercropping, cover cropping, and relay planting, we can drastically change these factors. So a little bit more about bio-intensive planting. It's a word that's been kicked around quite a bit, but this is a practical example of a bio-intensive intercrop that I've been using for many, many years now. So it's hard to distinguish, but this is a cabbage. This is a cabbage. There's a cabbage kind of off the frame here. This is a cabbage here, and this is a cabbage. All of these in between here are Chinese cabbage. Now, the distance from here to here is probably about 3.5 feet. So in conventional planting, there would maybe be 3 or 4 cabbage alone in this frame. But we have 4 or 5 and about 6 Chinese cabbage. This is also a dill plant. Some of them didn't survive. And I also want to point out that I have 1, 2, 3, probably 4, maybe 5 callaloo plants that are weeds in my system. So Jamaican callaloo is something that I allow to go to seed so that the seeds are always present. And anytime I stimulate the soil or add compost or anything that has nitrogen, callaloo just explodes. So I am selecting for my weed species, which is also a crop that I harvest from. It's actually the main crop that I've been harvesting over the last year. It feeds my family, and it is also the support crop for my cover cropping system. So within this frame, we are seeing not only a focal crop, which is the cabbage, but a secondary crop, which I probably actually made more money off of, the Chinese cabbage. Then my foundational species, which is the callaloo. And also, it is a form of relay planting my cover crop because I'm allowing my cover crop to establish from the beginning of my cropping cycle. So there's a lot I just said there, and to really understand that it will require you experimenting with it. What seems second nature to me now, because I've been doing it for over a decade, I've found is intimidating to farmers. And even looking at this bed and seeing these little specks of weeds is unsettling to some farmers. And to see plant leaves touching each other, they think maybe diseases or pests are going to spread or they're competing. But I can assure you that this is not happening with this intercrop. I've done it maybe 30 times, and it has basically always worked. It also has secondary important benefits. For example, aphids and caterpillars, our little cabbage moths, prefer Chinese cabbage a lot more than cabbage. It's softer, it's smellier, and they just seem to always land on the Chinese cabbage instead of the cabbage. So I can protect. This is a form of decoy planting, or there's another name for it that's slipping me. But I can protect my primary crop, which is the cabbage, by putting in these pak choi. Also, since pak choi and cabbage are in the same family, their microbiome, both on their surfaces and their root systems, are very similar. And so a faster establishing plant that is exuding more sugars into the soil faster, the pak choi, will start to nurture the soil microbiome that will, after I remove this, I don't remove the root system, I just cut it off. I even allow little Chinese cabbage or pak choi to grow afterwards, will then migrate across to the cabbage. I've taken a little bit too much time on this slide, but I think that this is a critically important tool that I would encourage all who's listening to, if you're not already doing, fully commit to experimenting with this, because from my experience, this is the fastest way, not only to improve your soil health, but to do the important thing, especially if we're convincing farmers, is to do these nature-based solutions that also simultaneously increase profits. Okay. Regenerative cultivation methods are a field of study that hasn't been um, dug into, for lack of a better term, too deeply within the tropical small scale setting. Most of the work has been done in the temperate, large scale farming operations. Just as the name regenerative comes up, I recommend that everyone start listening to the Regenerative Agricultural Podcast, hosted by John Kemp. um, this has been a great tool to me on my early research journey, something that you can play in the background that starts to get you familiar with some of the important terminologies of regenerative farming. We have to figure this out, how to do this within our context. It is very important to figure out how to disturb the soil less. So even if we're not going to go shift directly to no-till, we can start to reduce the amount of tillage. So in the picture we see here, we see um, areas in the middle of the bed and the sides of the bed where I am not disturbing. So there's areas of non-disturbance on all of my planting beds. Sometimes I rotate the positions. And then we have our cultivated zones. In this picture we see here. Here I've dug planting holes and added compost before transplanting. Um, so this is a form of strip planting, and this is kind of one of the focal points of my research, and I hope to share the results. If we do not have to plow the entire bed and only plow strips, we've already done a lot in preserving the soil microbiome and not disturbing the filament networks that are fungi species, the mycorrhizal filaments that are moving throughout our soil. Mentioning this, if you have to plow, you have to plow. And plowing and cultivation is a legitimate and important tool that is time tested and proven. So it is not to be dogmatic and think that we can never do these things, but just focusing on minimizing and not just doing it blindly and as a reflex action that every time we start a plant, we're planting a bed, we must plow it. I promise you that you will, if you do side-by-side trials where you do minimal tillage compared to full plowing, you will not see huge differences, and definitely not differences that are justified by the amount of labor and the amount of damage that forking and flipping beds especially does. Okay, so we're moving. We need to create areas for some accumulation and microbial sanctuaries. What is our biggest challenge in especially the Eastern Caribbean, of course, is our topography. This limits us from large-scale agriculture. But there's also advantages, and we need to play to our strengths. And what happens is we have supercharged areas on our farms energistically. And when I say that, I'm speaking of energy in terms of where soil carbon builds up, because that is pure energy from the sun, and also where water, which is also a form of energy within the agricultural context, and arguably most importantly, diversity builds up. So in this area here, we see a little gully, perhaps down in there, where the nutrients and water that are coming off of these beds are likely draining this way and accumulating, and we're going to see an explosion of vegetative growth in these areas. We need to use these areas strategically, and this is a focus of agroforestry, agroecology, and permaculture, and needs to be a focus of all farming systems. So I'm going to move past this. Um, weeds. Weeds are a sticking point, and it is every year I have a revelation about a new weed. I've been fighting with nutgrass for 20 years, and I think I'm finally coming to peace. I don't know what it's called in the other islands, but we're talking about the nut sedge that runs and drops these nuts or rhizomes in the soil. And once they're um, are persistent, so there are weeds that we need to, of course, remove, but there are some that we need to rethink. Water. In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward and I'm going to try and talk a little less because I'm starting to cough a little bit. So improving the soil microbiome is sometimes an activity that we need to take into our own hands. Some of you might be familiar with the terms IMOs and EMOs. These are either indigenous or effective microorganisms. I've been recently exploring JADAM, JADAM, a book that was given to me as a birthday present, which is a simplified form of Korean natural farming, where the focus is on indigenous microorganisms and how to use these indigenous microorganisms to speed up the decomposition and the extraction of biostimulants and fertilizers from the plants that we grow on our farm. This concept is based on a really elegant concept that what your plant needs is itself. So in other words, the best fertilizer for tomatoes is tomatoes. The best fertilizer for young tomatoes would be pruned tomato shoots. The best fertilizers for fruiting tomatoes might be tomatoes themselves. And attached to this concept is also that the weeds that grow in and around our farm are also likely the most important things that we could extract nutrients from for our farms. So nature, we know now, selects for the species that are required at the time and within the current circumstances. So it is perplexing that weeds that you've never seen before, and a conventional farmer told me this, that when he sprays Gramazone, all of a sudden grasses and weeds that he had never seen or hadn't been fighting just pop up. And this is a very interesting proof that nature does select for what is needed. And things like watergrass, I'm not sure what it's called in the other areas, or nutgrass, are pioneering species that fill the mandatory niche of covering the soil as fast as possible, tying it up and protecting it from exposure. So that is why when we cultivate the soil, we are always going to encounter these highly invasive, very aggressive species that are there to cover the soil up and protect it. And so the more we plow and the more we leave the soil uncovered, the more we will fight these species. So if we cover and plow less, you will see these species fade into the background, and other weed species that are more advanced in the expression of the evolution of your system will start to take up residency. Another quick point to point out is we've always known that it's important to save your own seeds, but we're starting to understand more from a microbiological perspective why this is important. And a lot of the adaptations that plants make to a system is, yeah, it's genetic selection based on environmental stimuli, but those environmental stimuli are not expressed, or are, I should say, are expressed through their interactions with their microbiome. So it is actually the microbiome that we're starting to understand that is influencing the adaptation of seeds and species to their environment. By saving your own seeds, you're saving the microbiome also that is specific to your environment. So we're now also realizing that seeds intake bacteria and fungus from their environment that were growing on their surfaces. and then as they're moved to different locations, inoculate where they've been sowed with the specific microbiome that they need. This is now why I had been buying coated seeds with fungicides, because that's sometimes all that's available. And I've been justifying this, that it's not that serious, and that if I add compost, it will remedy it. But compost doesn't solve everything. And the biology in compost is specific to the composting process and not specific to individual plant species. And so seeds are actually the best vehicle to creating the soil microbiome that's or rhizosphere that is necessary, especially for early plant development. And for those agronomists and practitioners out there, we know that if plants don't get what they need early, we have an uphill battle. We'll speak more on that a couple of slides later on. Okay, so of course, growing healthy plants is the critical focus of all agricultural production, but it is also the critical focus of soil regeneration and building systems that utilize soil and water most efficiently. So a healthy plant with an expansive root system and photosynthetic surface area produces a proportional amount of root exudates. So the bigger and healthier and more expansive our root systems are is directly proportional to the amount that that plant can give back to the soil. And I might not have mentioned it, but more than 50% for sure. Some scientists are saying up to 80% of stable soil organic matter. So that's not transient soil organic matter that is affected by cultivation like compost, but the one that humifies, goes and gets incorporated and intertwined with clay molecules and turns our soil darker. These stable forms of soil organic matter are almost all produced through root exudates. Some of it is through deep root shedding when we cut plants back or kill plants and the roots degrade in the soil, but more of it is produced by the sugars that plants exude into the soil. Now, there's an amazing agricultural hack that many farmers and most farmers in St. Lucia that I know have come across through practice. A lot of farmers will say they're organic, they don't use fertilizers, they just use a little well grow. And I used to laugh at this and shake my head and say, yeah, you're not really organic. But my tune is changing a little bit, because some of these well grow formulations and some of the more organic looking ones are doing something very important. They're incorporating a range of micronutrients. And this is something that is of critical importance to all technocrats and regional gatekeepers for the agricultural industry. We need to begin to bring in micronutrient solutions that are able to provide not just the regular ones, but like 20 or 40 of them. And so that farmers can manipulate micronutrient dosings. Even if they're of a chemical origin, the amounts that are being introduced into the ecosystem are minuscule compared to the macronutrients. So they're not going to have the ecological impact that nitrate forms and ammonia forms of nitrogen and potassium, which is also can be very harmful to the soil microbiome when applied in too great an amount and at the wrong times. The micronutrients aren't going to have this dramatic impact or negative impact or polluting effect. So I invite everybody to rethink foliar feeding and liquid fertilization. because this is actually the best hack that conventional agriculture has come up with. Because if we are able to get these micronutrients to the plant at the early and right stage, they are able to develop and exude and produce the auxins and the biostimulants and the enzymes that are going to send out the signals to the soil microbiome to create a rhizobiome, a rhizosphere that is actually then going to be able to feed these nutrients and access these nutrients back to the plant. So by producing them early through the plant, stimulating the system, there is a back-end effect of these systems being able to cycle these nutrients more efficiently from nature. So if we are to stimulate the soil microbiome, we can efficiently do it by stimulating plants by providing the right micronutrients at the right time. So this is, I believe, the cutting edge of agronomy. I'm hoping that others are have knowledge to share and guide me, because this is one of the, I think, one of the key things that we need to be researching. Okay, I'm a little behind time, so I might start moving a little faster. Solutions to protect the soil surface naturally. This is the one that not too many people, I think, are going to have to be convinced about. But what I am going to put forward is that living mulches or living canopies should be the primary focus, and not necessarily only relying on brown mulches or covering the soil with dead plant organic matter. The reasons for this, of course, are the beneficial impact of having these root systems. So what we don't see that is happening underground, but also the huge importance of these leaves protecting the soil surface from the impact of raindrops. And also, of course, the direct interaction of sunlight with the soil. And the fact that we're best utilizing space and photosynthetic potential. And that's going to be another theme that I'm going to press on before we end this presentation, is that we have to get past this idea that a clean farm is where you can see lots of spaces and spaced out plants, and you can see all underneath the plants. No, nice, clean stone or gravel pathways. No, we need to see green everywhere, in our drains, on our pathways, everywhere. Because everywhere where we don't see green is a lost opportunity to build the soil and to increase infiltration capacity, or the ability of water to penetrate directly into the soil and be held in the soil profile. Okay, brown mulches are, of course, important. And as you can see here, these kale plants definitely benefit from the brown mulches. So I just got a signal saying that I was muted. I'm begging that people were. I'm hoping that people were hearing me.
Sorry, Damien. I was trying to mute somebody else and I muted you by mistake.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Everybody's okay. Everything is coming across so far. No technical glitches. Okay. All right. So brown mulches. I'm not going to spend time on this, because I will say that from my experience using both plastic mulches and brown mulches, I feel that natural mulches just perform better, especially in the tropics, because of soil heating. I've read literature that counteracts that standpoint, but I would love to hear others' opinion on that. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about vetiver. This is something intricate to the research I'm doing. And I'm going to make, again, some bold statements about the vetiver plant. I think it's been misused, and I think the research has been more focused on it as a hill slope erosion control mechanism, which is, it has an amazing capacity and potential to do that. But in so doing that, I think we've neglected what its most amazing capacity is, and that its ability to regrow when it is cut down to the soil surface. So because when we're using it as a soil erosion measure, we want to keep some of the stubble, what happens is the plants get choked out. They, over time, just begin to run out of um, energy in their root systems to push the new shoots through the dead stubble. And so the plant gets weaker and weaker and is unable to access sunlight at early enough stages to regenerate properly. When we were using vetiver or couscous to cover all of our houses, all of our ancestors slept under roofs of this grass at some point in time. We cut it at as low as possible. The lower you cut this plant, the faster it regrows, and its speed of regrowth is unbelievable. Sometimes I'm able to cut 6 foot stalks within 3 months, so 4 cuts a year, and I'm talking, 5 to up to 20 pounds of organic matter from each clump. And so we're talking potentially hundreds of pounds of organic matter. A great thing about using vetiver as a mulch, I'll zoom in a little bit right here, is it's is the longest standing material. In other words, it takes the longest to break down out of any mulch material that I've used. And it is rough, and it has little razory bumps, so you have to wear long sleeves and gloves. But these little bumps actually prevent or discourage the movement of slugs and snails. Not to say that they won't do it, but it's not their preferred habitat. So one of the issues that farmers bring up about mulching is that it's going to encourage pest and disease. And I would agree that that's possible, especially if a farmer is converting from an intensive nitrogen-based chemical farming system, where the over-application of nitrogen and other macronutrients cause blooms of diseases, um, um, omocytes, and different fungi that are pathogens, that if you then go and mulch it with a natural mulch, you might actually create more problems for yourself. So mulching with these natural, long-standing mulches is something you have to move into gradually, and you have to establish, they should be done in conjunction with composting, and they should also be done in conjunction with the addition of leaf mold from your surrounding forests. So underneath the vetiver you're seeing here, I will first add leaf mold, rotting leaves. The purpose for this is to make sure that I'm introducing enough fungal communities that are able to outcompete the pathogenic fungal communities that could cause problems for you when you're creating this nice, cool, nutrient-rich, wet environment under your permanent mulches. Okay, so love to hear some questions about my experience with vetiver in the question section of it. Just going to move a little faster. I see I'm already about 10 minutes over time. Relay planting. This is just a quick, this is actually the same area. So after this crop came out, again, I allowed the callaloo. I went in and seeded mucuna bean in some of these higher beds. You're not seeing it. Unfortunately, the time I took the picture wasn't so good. Jack bean, I seeded along this bed. I also use cowpea. So as the crop is maturing, I go in and I just stick seeds in and I'll start selecting for the native weeds and herbs that I want to create my cover crop. So this was taken yesterday or day before. So I'm gonna leave this like this. I go through and I take out the water grass in my pathways, and before I close the system up for another 2 months of this wild slash controlled fallow, I'm going to remove the water grass, put it in the pathways, and mulch the pathways with vetiver, because I want herbal species, forb species, species that have a diversity of root systems and root types to be the majority of what's happening here. I don't want single species to take over and dominate. So I am selecting for diversity when I'm cover cropping. Don't have time to go too much into why. We can talk about that in the questions. But cover cropping with legumes alone is now being called into question. And the overall utility of legumes as the go-to for cover cropping is also being um, challenged. And a diverse approach is being settled on as the best rule of thumb. Okay. In a previous presentation, I talked about trench composting. I just want to briefly go over this. This is something that I've been doing for years now, and I'm getting a little better at it. Let me see if I can blow this one up too a little bit. So this is a bed. Let me get a pointer. Oh, I can't do both at the same time. Sorry. Okay, so if you can see my hand here, this is the edge of a bed. This is the path or the drain in between a bed, about 14 inches. This is the next bed, and this is my bed surface. You can see my permanent or my furrows and my undisturbed spaces here. Okay, and this is material. I try and get rotting wood to put at the base of this, and then I chop up thick things like castor or callaloo stems to kind of prevent compaction here and to allow the movement of water, or if it's the rainy season, the drain to still act like a drain. In this one, I've put a layer of vetiver on top of that. And then this layer is all my weeds that I've collected from the area. Then I put a layer of chicken manure and another layer of vetiver to cap it off. And so now essentially my drain or pathway disappears and is just a vetiver walkway. It becomes spongy and very pleasant to walk on. Let me go forward here. So this is a quick demonstration. This is what the area looked like beforehand. So my path is through here. This is after this callaloo that was here. You can see it here. I chopped up the stems, put them down. Then I cleaned all underneath, pulled the lentus and the watergrass and whatever that was under these dasheen. I cleaned this other bed. So I generally do a trench compost using the material from the two adjacent beds. I pile it up in the middle here. I tuck it in. I take a little time to really stuff it in and fold it under and try and compact it as much as possible. And then here's my leaf mold. So I always collect in my cold composting area all the leaves that I rake up from around. And so I always have just slowly decomposing leaves to put on top of the weeds. You see the weeds have now disappeared. And then this is my chicken manure that I then spread on top of this. This is a stimulant. And because I'm dealing with brown layers, and this vetiver is very lignous or carbonaceous, as it browns, the chicken manure will help it decompose. And then this was a picture taken a couple of days ago. You can see the vetiver underneath here. You can see some watergrass starting to peek back in. And you can see how fast this callaloo, which had almost disappeared 4 weeks ago, but I did leave young ones like I always do, has just exploded. It's hard to differentiate to see the growth of the dasheen, but it grew considerably and has now closed canopy. And so there's no weeds underneath here anymore. I'm considering putting another layer of material on top of this and remulching it with the vetiver. But if we back up a slide or two, this was what I was getting under this yesterday after about 5, maybe 6 weeks of decomposition. So this is the top layer of vetiver, and this is the watergrass and lentus vines that's now definitely blackening and decomposing, and most importantly, is mostly dead. So it is a way to manage your weeds. I want to say that this feels very natural to me when I'm doing it. It almost makes me wonder if this is how it always used to be done, or um, so although it's something that I've never seen anyone else do in St. Lucia, I'm curious to know if this trench composting in interbed spaces, pathway composting, I don't know what to call it yet, is being practiced by anyone. Um, it in the literature and following the Korean natural farming principle of what your beds need or what the soil needs is what is growing on them. It keeps, it really is centralizes that focus in that I'm keeping everything that is on these beds at least close to these beds and able, so the microbial communities are never leaving the area and are there and can move back into the beds either side. And then, of course, what generally happens is when the dry season comes, I'm going to take all of this decomposed material and spread it back on the beds or use it as my planting compost in the trenches or planting holes that I'm going to establish on these beds. So the material goes directly back on the beds. We therefore are cutting out the transportation of the materials on farm, which is one of the most tedious parts of compost building, is that you have to collect material and move it. And then you say you're going to move it later, you leave it there, you don't move it, it kind of disintegrates, and you didn't really put it in a spot that was beneficial to the bed, and you didn't hold it in a way where the decomposition was controlled and the volatilization of the organic matter was moderated. So the system that I'm showing you here is able to moderate or slow down or control the decomposition composition, so we still have substantial material to put onto our beds. Okay, so the final thing that I'm going to talk about today is agroecological orchestration. And I am going to only take a minute or two to talk about this because I'm hoping that this moves into our discussions after. And this goes back to the concept that a deep understanding of the complementary ecological niches, we can orchestrate systems that maximize diversity and population density to levels that surpass most natural systems. So whenever people say surpassing nature, the hairs on your back are going to go up a little bit, or they should, because nature is edified as a perfect system. And I'm not here to tell you that it's not. But just as the music of crickets and clack clacks is musical and it's great, um, if you have a nice drum and other instruments complementing these natural noises, you can create something even greater. And maybe just from a human perspective, but the human perspective is actually what's important to us humans. And we can create systems that may not serve in the ways that nature was designed to do, but they can serve us better. And so if we are able to harness our creativity to synthesize and maximize the relationship, the ecological relationships between plants and ecosystem service providers, and bring in remarkable species that didn't exist in our systems, like vetiver, like Glacidia, um, like countless others, like the fruit trees that we grow, that are super efficient at producing sugar. If we but don't exist in our natural forests for the most part, by introducing these remarkable species and concentrating them and centralizing them and focusing on them, it's actually ridiculous to think that we can't produce systems that outperform the systems that would have been there without our design and orchestration. So I hope to be challenged on that claim, um, because I think it's a really important discussion. And there's not too many slides that I can show you that easily represent agroecological orchestration. But I would say we need to mimic the best ones. So the layers within a mature rainforest has to be a starting point. The more layers we have, the more energy. We need to think more and better about how we orient our farms, and how we utilize planting patterns. So far too much of it is done haphazardly without understanding the movement of the sun. Um, much is said about how our ancestors tracked the movement of the sun and the celestial sphere, um, most focus on religious and ceremonial purposes, but I believe that at least a large portion of it was about understanding the migration of the sun throughout the different times of the year and to adapt um, how we design our roads, our farms, and our planting patterns on it. So I invite everybody to think deeply about the architecture of how you lay out your farm. This is something that I'm passionate about and part of the consulting work I do. So if anyone wants to dig into this deeper, they can contact me. We mentioned focusing on creating these biomass and biodiversity accumulation zones. So this is one of the core tenets of permaculture and agroecology. I can't stay on it too long. Water, again, is a key component of the focus of this training. Although we've been focusing on soil and plant management, they're so connected that, and perhaps I should mention again, infiltration capacity. So root systems are what creates infiltration or increases infiltration capacity, because soil organic matter, as we know, is what creates stable aggregates. And if we're talking about water management, we need aggregated, well-draining soil that has the capacity of its aggregates not to break down when saturated for short periods of time and hold water in the profile. So with regards to water, I wasn't able to include water on-farm water management strategies. So how we orient our farm to not only reduce the speed and erosive power of the movement of water, but maximize storage. I'm hoping that this can come up in the questions as well, because this is something that is a focus of my research. Well, everything I do here. So we're in a dry place, and so we're trying to store millions of gallons of water, right? I'm trying to get even past the hundreds of thousands water in the system. Okay, we're almost, I think this is our last slide. Orchestrating the system layout to best utilize both cropping and non-cropping areas. So again, I mentioned our pathways, our drains. This is critically important and circles back to water management. I think this is the low-hanging fruit of how we can manage water better. Is just we seem to be making consistent errors in the way we drain our farms, and how we and not incorporating planted plants into our drainage systems where the most nutrients and water gather. And therefore, these areas can be our biodiversity hubs. So I'm hoping that everybody has that takeaway from this presentation. And I'm really excited to move into the questions. I'm sorry that I took about 15 or 20 minutes too long, but I'm hoping we still have a time for a robust discussion.